You work in a sewer. What possible business could you conduct? Could you possibly write off in your apartment? I practice in a bathtub.
What if television's most beloved working-class couple was filmed using revolutionary space-age technology, starred an actress who had to prove she was ugly enough for the role, and featured a leading man who refused to rehearse but somehow created comedy gold? From secret signals to forgotten casting disasters, this classic sitcom hides bizarre production secrets that would shock even the most devoted fans. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about the Honeymooners. Fact 1. Ralph's stomach pat was a panic signal.
You seem to have forgotten that I am a woman.
I forgot that you're a woman? How could I? You're always yapping.
One of Ralph Cramden's most recognizable gestures wasn't actually part of his character at all, but rather Jackie Gleason's clever way of hiding a very real problem during live television performances. When viewers saw Ralph patting his substantial belly while talking to Alice or Norton, they assumed it was just another endearing quirk of the bombastic bus driver. But in reality, Gleason was sending a desperate message to his fellow actors that he had completely forgotten his lines and needed immediate help. The situation arose because of Gleason's unusual approach to preparing for the show, which was essentially not preparing at all. Unlike most actors who would spend days memorizing scripts and rehearsing scenes, Gleason had a strict policy against rehearsals, believing they would rob the performance of its natural spontaneity and energy. He would read through the script just once, then show up on Saturday night to perform the episode live in front of 1,000 audience members at the Adelphi Theater, trusting his photographic memory and natural comedic instincts to carry him through. However, even someone with Gleason's remarkable memory occasionally drew a blank, especially under the pressure of live television with no opportunity for retakes or do-overs. When this happened, Gleason would begin patting his stomach in what appeared to be a casual, character-appropriate gesture, but his co-stars Audrey Meadows and Art Carney quickly learned to recognize this as their cue to jump in with improvised dialogue or physical comedy that would give their panicking star enough time to collect his thoughts and remember where the scene was supposed to go next. The other actors became so skilled at covering for these moments that most viewers never realized anything had gone wrong, and the stomach patting simply became part of Ralph's established mannerisms. Fact 2. Audrey Meadows staged an ugly photo shoot.
This is my home, and when you come in here, treat me with respect and address me with a civil tongue.
Oh, why don't you shut up?
When Audrey Meadows first auditioned for the role of Alice Cramden, Jackie Gleason took one look at the polished Broadway actress and immediately rejected her, telling his producers that she was far too young and attractive to believably play the wife of a working-class Brooklyn bus driver. Gleason had a very specific vision for the Honeymooners that emphasized authentic, gritty realism over the glossy perfection that dominated most 1950s television, and he felt that Meadows' glamorous appearance would undermine the show's blue-collar credibility. Rather than accepting this rejection and moving on to other opportunities, Meadows decided to take matters into her own hands with a plan that was both brilliant and slightly desperate. She contacted photographer Bill Mark and arranged for him to come to her apartment early one morning to take a series of deliberately unflattering pictures that would show Gleason exactly what she could look like as a downtrodden housewife. For the photo session, Meadows wore a frumpy, torn housecoat, put her hair up in curlers, scrubbed off every trace of makeup, and posed in her kitchen holding a frying pan while looking completely exhausted and world-weary. When Meadows' manager showed these photographs to Gleason, the comedian's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic, declaring that they had found their Alice Cramden and demanding that his team locate this perfect specimen of working-class womanhood. The photos were so convincing that Gleason had absolutely no idea he was looking at the same elegant actress he had rejected just days earlier. When he finally learned the truth about the woman in the photographs, Gleason was reportedly both amazed and impressed, telling his associates that any actress determined enough to go to such lengths to prove herself for the role clearly deserved to have it. Fact 3. Jackie Gleason never rehearsed the show.
I think I'll wind up the proceedings here with Norton's famous mystery, atomic cannonball.
Jackie Gleason had an ironclad rule when it came to preparing for the Honeymooners that went against every standard practice in television and theater. He absolutely refused to participate in rehearsals of any kind, believing that too much preparation would drain all the natural energy and spontaneity out of the final performance. While most actors and directors considered rehearsals essential for a successful show, especially one being broadcast live to millions of viewers with no chance for mistakes to be edited out, Gleason was convinced that the magic of comedy came from fresh, unrehearsed reactions and genuine surprise between the performers. This unusual philosophy created a serious problem for his co-stars Audrey Meadows, Art Carney, and Joyce Randolph, who were understandably terrified about going into a live television performance without having run through their scenes with the star of the show. The three actors found themselves in the bizarre position of having to secretly rehearse among themselves, taking turns reading Gleason's lines for each other so they could at least be prepared for their own parts and timing, even if they had no idea exactly what their leading man might do during the actual broadcast. Meadows later described the nerve-wracking experience of her first episode, explaining that she never had a single conversation with Gleason about her character or the script until the actual night of the live performance, leaving her so anxious that tears were streaming down her face by Saturday evening. The only concession Gleason would sometimes make was to show up for what was called blocking, where the actors would walk through their positions on the set without actually performing their lines. But even this bare minimum of preparation was not guaranteed. Art Carney defended Gleason's approach by pointing out that their unconventional method must have been working, since the show's ratings and critical acclaim proved that audiences loved the raw, unpolished energy that came from their barely rehearsed performances. Fact 4. Art Carney copied his father's mannerisms.
Forgive me.
Forgive you? It was all my fault, darling one. I should never have talked the way I did, sweetheart. I never should have listened to Ralph.
One of Ed Norton's most beloved and memorable characteristics was his tendency to turn the simplest everyday tasks into elaborate, almost ceremonial productions, complete with dramatic flourishes, careful adjustments, and meticulous preparation that could stretch a 30-second activity into several minutes of pure comedic gold. Whether Norton was signing a letter, preparing to play the piano, or getting ready to write something down, viewers could always count on him to first adjust his sleeves, position his paper just so, flex his fingers, check his posture, align his pen, and perform a dozen other unnecessary but hilarious preliminary steps before actually beginning the task at hand. What audiences didn't realize was that Art Carney wasn't creating these funny rituals from his imagination, but was instead drawing directly from his own childhood memories of watching his father go through nearly identical routines in their family home. Carney's father was apparently the kind of man who simply could not perform even the most basic activities without first going through an extensive series of preparatory movements and adjustments that seemed completely out of proportion to the simple task he was about to undertake. When young Art would watch his father sit down to sign his report card or write a letter, he would observe the same kind of elaborate setup process that would later become Norton's signature trait, including adjusting the desk lamp to exactly the right angle, carefully positioning the paper, moving other objects around on the desk surface, flexing his arms and hands, and double-checking that his pen was working properly. These childhood observations stayed with Carney throughout his acting career, and when he was developing the character of Ed Norton, he realized that these real-life mannerisms from his own family would be perfect for creating a character who was lovably obsessive about the smallest details of daily life. Fact 5. The show used revolutionary electronicam technology.
Well, what's in it?
I don't know what's in it. Can't be anything of value. They would have claimed it.
Can't be of any value or you wouldn't have found it.
Hey, you dirty.
The Honeymooners was filmed using one of the most advanced and unusual recording systems of the 1950s, called the Electronicam, which was developed by James L. Cadigan specifically for the Dumont Television Network and represented a major leap forward in television production technology. This innovative system worked by using a special beam splitter device that could simultaneously capture the same performance on both traditional television cameras and high-quality film cameras, essentially allowing producers to broadcast a live television show while also creating a permanent film record of exactly the same performance. The Electronicam setup involved mounting a television camera head and a film camera side by side on the same base, with both cameras sharing a common lens system that would split the incoming light into two separate paths. Half of the light would go to the film portion of the system to create a high-quality movie-style recording, while the other half would feed into the television camera's pickup tube to provide the live broadcast signal that viewers saw in their homes on Saturday nights. This technology was particularly important for the Honeymooners because it solved a major problem that plagued most live television shows of that era, which could only be preserved using a process called kinescoping that involved pointing a film camera at a television screen and recording whatever appeared there. The resulting kinescope recordings were notoriously poor in both picture and sound quality, making them unsuitable for rebroadcasting or future syndication, but the Electronicam system produced film-quality recordings that could be rerun indefinitely without any loss of clarity or detail. The Electronicam cameras were bulky and somewhat difficult to maneuver because each unit had to support both the television and film components. But this revolutionary system is the reason why the Honeymooners episodes still look remarkably clear and sharp today, decades after they were originally filmed. Fact 6. The set had curtain backdrops.
Step up. Plant your feet firmly. Hello, boy!
The famous Cramden apartment kitchen, which served as the primary setting for nearly every episode of The Honeymooners, was not quite as solid and permanent as it appeared to television viewers, since the scenic backgrounds that created the illusion of walls and windows were actually nothing more than large painted curtains hung behind the main set pieces. The production team used these fabric backdrops to create the visual impression of a real apartment kitchen with painted scenes showing the view outside the kitchen window and the area behind the stove. But the curtain material was not always perfectly positioned or secured during the live filming process. Because the show was performed live in front of an audience with no opportunity for retakes or corrections, there was no way to stop and fix any problems with the set that might occur during filming, which meant that sometimes the painted curtains would shift or separate slightly during the course of an episode. Sharp-eyed viewers who watch the classic 39 episodes closely can actually spot several instances where the corner seams of these backdrop curtains become visible, creating small gaps that reveal glimpses of whatever was behind the painted fabric, whether it was bare studio walls, equipment, or other parts of the television studio. These minor set malfunctions were simply part of the authentic live television experience that Jackie Gleason insisted on maintaining, and rather than being embarrassing mistakes, they actually add to the charm and genuine feel of the show for modern viewers who can appreciate the challenges and limitations that the cast and crew faced while creating live entertainment. The curtain backdrops were a practical and economical solution for a television production that needed to create the atmosphere of a realistic Brooklyn apartment while working within the constraints of a small studio space and a limited budget for elaborate set construction. Fact 7. Elaine Stritch was the original Trixie.
You better be careful. My friend is even bigger than me.
Your friend Harvey is bigger than you? I have a friend Shirley that's bigger than you.
Before Joyce Randolph became the sweet and patient Trixie Norton that fans remember and love, the role was originally played by Broadway powerhouse Elaine Stritch in a very different interpretation that lasted for exactly one performance before Jackie Gleason decided to completely overhaul the character. Stritch appeared in the very first Honeymooners sketch called The New Television alongside Gleason, Art Carney, and Pert Kelton. But her version of Trixie was written as a sharp-tongued, abrasive former burlesque dancer who brought a much harder edge to the character than what viewers would later come to expect from Ed Norton's wife. The original Trixie was conceived as someone with a tough background in show business who could match the men in verbal sparring and wasn't afraid to speak her mind in ways that could be quite cutting and sarcastic. Stritch, who was already establishing herself as a formidable talent on Broadway and would later become famous for her work in shows like Company and At Liberty, brought her natural wit and commanding stage presence to the role, creating a character who was far more confrontational and worldly than the gentle housewife that Trixie would eventually become. However, after seeing how this version of Trixie played out in the first sketch, Gleason realized that the abrasive ex-burlesque dancer characterization didn't fit with his overall vision for the Honeymooners, which he wanted to focus on more relatable, everyday working-class people rather than characters with show business backgrounds. He decided to completely rewrite Trixie as a wholesome, supportive wife who would provide a softer contrast to Alice's sharp tongue and Ralph's bluster, and he recast the role with Joyce Randolph, who brought an entirely different energy to the character that better suited the family-friendly tone Gleason was trying to establish for the series. Fact 8. Joyce Randolph was TV's most murdered actress.
One of these days, you're gonna push me too far.
The only thing that could push you is a bulldozer.
All right, get out!
Long before Joyce Randolph became known as the cheerful and loyal Trixie Norton, she had built an unusual specialty in early television by repeatedly playing victims of violent crimes in detective shows and mystery dramas that dominated the airwaves in the late 1940s and early 1950s. During one particularly busy 12-month period in 1952, Randolph appeared so frequently as a murder victim that the New York Daily News published a profile keeping track of all the different ways her characters had met their dramatic ends on television screens across America. According to the newspaper's tally, Randolph had been shot to death 14 separate times, strangled 4 times, stabbed with a penknife 3 times, thrown out of windows twice, and run down by a speeding limousine once, earning her the unofficial title of television's most murdered actress. This remarkable body count came about because early television needed a constant supply of actors willing to play small but important roles in the crime dramas and detective series that were extremely popular with viewers, and Randolph had developed a reputation among casting directors as someone who could convincingly portray a victim while also being professional and easy to work with on set. The irony of this casting pattern was not lost on Randolph herself, who later joked about her morbid television career when interviewers would ask about her work before the Honeymooners. She had become so associated with playing murder victims that when Jackie Gleason spotted her in a Clorette's chewing gum commercial and decided to cast her as Trixie Norton, it represented a complete departure from the type of roles she had been getting, transforming her from television's most frequently killed character actor into one of America's most beloved sitcom wives, practically overnight. Fact 9. The apartment address was Gleason's real childhood home.
We will be there. Just make sure that you show up.
Don't worry, I'll be there. And if you don't show up, I'll come get you. Where do you live?
328 Chauncey Street.
The fictional address where Ralph and Alice Cramden lived, their working-class Brooklyn life was not chosen randomly by the show's writers, but was instead a deeply personal tribute that Jackie Gleason incorporated into the series based on his own childhood experiences growing up in the same neighborhood. Throughout most episodes of The Honeymooners, the Cramdens and Nortons are said to live at 328 Chauncey Street in the Bushwick section of Brooklyn, which was actually located just a few doors down from Jackie Gleason's real childhood home after his family moved to 364 Chauncey Street when he was a young boy. Gleason had grown up in this exact Brooklyn neighborhood during the 1920s and 30s, experiencing firsthand the kind of working-class struggles, financial pressures, and dreams of upward mobility that would later become the central themes of Ralph Cramden's character. By setting his fictional show on the same street where he had lived as a child, Gleason was drawing directly from his own memories of tenement life, neighborhood dynamics, and the particular mix of hope and frustration that characterized families trying to make ends meet during difficult economic times. The choice to use Chauncey Street as the setting was Gleason's way of honoring his Brooklyn roots, while also lending authentic detail to the show that came from genuine lived experience rather than Hollywood imagination. Interestingly, there was at least one episode where the address was mistakenly referred to as 728 Chauncey Street instead of 328, but the connection to Gleason's actual childhood neighborhood remained consistent throughout the series, helping to ground the show's working-class themes in the real geography and social dynamics of mid-20th century Brooklyn that Gleason knew intimately from his own upbringing. Fact 10. Norton referenced George Burns by his real name. In one of the more subtle and clever inside jokes that the Honeymooners writers slipped into the show, Ed Norton casually mentions a co-worker from the sewer department named Nat Birnbaum while working on a crossword puzzle, which most viewers would have assumed was just another random character name created for the episode. However, this seemingly innocent reference was actually a playful nod to one of the most famous entertainers of the era, since Nat Birnbaum was the real birth name of George Burns, the legendary comedian who was already well known to television and radio audiences for his work alongside his wife, Gracie Allen. The reference appears when Norton is helping with a crossword puzzle and explains that Nat is a three-letter word meaning bug, using his fictional sewer department colleague as an example to solve the puzzle clue. This type of wordplay was typical of Norton's character, who was often portrayed as someone with an unexpectedly broad knowledge of trivia and crossword puzzle solutions, despite his job as a sewer worker and his generally scattered approach to most other aspects of life. The joke would have been particularly amusing to viewers who were familiar with the entertainment industry and knew that George Burns had been born Nathan Birnbaum in New York City before adopting his famous stage name early in his career. Burns was already a household name by the 1950s thanks to his radio show with Gracie Allen and their transition to television, so using his real name as a throwaway reference in a Honeymooners episode was the kind of insider humor that the show's writers enjoyed, including for observant fans. The fact that Norton presents this information so matter-of-factly, as if having a sewer department colleague named after a famous comedian was perfectly normal, adds to the absurd charm that made his character so endearing to audiences. Fact 11. Audrey Meadows was the only cast member to get residuals.
There isn't room in this place for you and me.
There isn't room in this place for you and anybody.
When Audrey Meadows signed her contract to play Alice Cramden in 1952, she had a significant advantage that her co-stars Jackie Gleason, Art Carney, and Joyce Randolph did not have. Two brothers who worked as attorneys and understood the entertainment business well enough to insist on contract terms that would prove to be extraordinarily valuable in the decades to come. Edward and Robert Meadows accompanied their sister to the contract negotiations and demanded that a specific clause be included that would guarantee Audrey payments whenever the show was rebroadcast or sold for syndication, which was an unusual request at the time since most television shows were expected to have a brief initial run and then disappear forever. The network executives and producers agreed to include this residual clause in Meadows' contract without much resistance, primarily because no one in the television industry at that time could have imagined that a working-class sitcom about a Brooklyn bus driver would still be popular and profitable 40 years later. The concept of television syndication was still relatively new, and most industry professionals assumed that audiences would quickly lose interest in reruns of shows they had already seen, making the residual payments seem like a minor concession that would probably never amount to much money. However, the Honeymooners proved to have remarkable staying power, becoming a late-night television staple that aired continuously on stations across the country and eventually around the world, generating steady income for decades through syndication deals, home video sales, and licensing agreements. While Jackie Gleason, Art Carney, and Joyce Randolph received only their original salaries for creating one of television's most beloved series, Audrey Meadows continued to receive regular checks that eventually totaled millions of dollars over the course of her lifetime, making her the only cast member to benefit financially from the show's enduring popularity and cultural impact. Fact 12. Gleason improvised every bang zoom moment, one of Ralph Kramden's most iconic catchphrases, his explosive bang zoom to the moon, Alice. Threat that he would shout whenever his wife got the better of him in an argument was never written into any script or planned by the show's writers, but was instead something that Jackie Gleason created spontaneously during live performances and then continued to use whenever he felt the moment was right. These famous outbursts, along with the similar "one of these days, Alice Pow," right in the kisser. Threats were pure Gleason improvisation that came directly from his character's frustrated reactions to being outsmarted or contradicted by his sharp-tongued wife. The spontaneous nature of these catchphrases was perfectly in line with Gleason's overall approach to performing The Honeymooners, since he believed that the best comedy came from genuine, unscripted moments that couldn't be duplicated through careful preparation or rehearsal. When Ralph would find himself backed into a corner by Alice's logic or caught in one of his own contradictions, Gleason would let his natural comedic instincts take over and deliver these bombastic threats that were clearly meant to be empty bluster rather than any kind of real menace. The timing and delivery of these improvised lines became so associated with Ralph's character that audiences would eagerly wait for them in each episode, knowing that whenever Alice got the upper hand in their verbal sparring matches, Ralph would inevitably respond with one of his over-the-top threats about sending her to the moon or other equally ridiculous destinations. The fact that these moments were never scripted but arose organically from Gleason's performance gave them an authentic energy and spontaneity that helped make them some of the most memorable and frequently quoted lines in television history, even though they represented Ralph's complete inability to come up with any real comeback to his wife's superior wit. Fact 13. Cary Grant personally sought out Audrey Meadows.
You getting enough to eat?
Oh, of course I am, Mother. You wouldn't say that if you could see our food bill.
Well, I don't doubt the bills are high. But how much of the food are you getting?
During the Honeymooners' summer hiatus between seasons, Audrey Meadows was working on the Paramount Studios lot when she had an unexpected encounter that perfectly demonstrated how much respect her television work had earned among Hollywood's biggest stars. Cary Grant, who was widely considered the epitome of sophisticated leading men and one of the most successful movie stars in the world, made a deliberate point of approaching Meadows one afternoon to tell her personally how much he admired her performance as Alice Kramden on the show. This was particularly remarkable because there was usually a clear divide between television actors and movie stars during the 1950s, with many film actors looking down on television work as inferior or less prestigious than motion pictures. For someone of Cary Grant's stature and reputation to not only watch a working-class television sitcom, but to actively seek out one of its stars to offer praise was an extraordinary compliment that spoke to the quality and impact of Meadows' acting on The Honeymooners. Grant's approach to Meadows was entirely voluntary and unexpected, since the two actors moved in different professional circles and had no previous personal or professional connection that would have brought them together under normal circumstances. The fact that one of Hollywood's most elegant and refined performers took the time to specifically compliment Meadows on her portrayal of a sharp-tongued Brooklyn housewife showed that Alice Kramden had transcended typical television comedy to become a character that even the most sophisticated entertainment industry professionals recognized as genuinely brilliant acting. This encounter also highlighted how the Honeymooners had managed to attract viewers and admirers across all levels of society, from working-class audiences who saw their own lives reflected in the Kramdens' struggles to wealthy Hollywood stars who appreciated the show's authentic performances and genuine comedic craftsmanship. Fact 14. The show was filmed live before 1,000 people.
Thanks, pal.
All right, now just go in there and get a good night's sleep.
The worst thing they can possibly do to you is send you to the federal pen. What are you starting with that stuff for?
Every single one of the 39 classic episodes of The Honeymooners was performed and filmed in front of a live theater audience of exactly 1,000 people at the Dumont Television Network's Adelphi Theater, located at 152 West 54th Street in Manhattan, creating an atmosphere that was more like a Broadway show than a typical television production. This live audience format was Jackie Gleason's deliberate choice because he believed that performing in front of real people brought out the best in his actors and gave the show an energy and authenticity that could never be replicated in an empty studio with only cameras and crew members watching. The presence of a full theater audience meant that the cast had to deliver their performances with the same precision and commitment as stage actors, since there were no opportunities for retakes or corrections if someone missed a line or made a mistake during filming. When props fell apart, like the handy housewife helper device that malfunctioned during the Better Living Through Television episode, the actors had to continue with their scenes and incorporate the mishap into their performance rather than stopping to fix the problem, which actually added to the authentic feel of the show. The audience members would queue up around the block hours before each filming, sometimes waiting for several hours just to get seats in the theater and witness the creation of television history in person. Their laughter, gasps, and reactions became an integral part of each episode, creating a genuine theatrical experience that gave the show's comedy timing a natural rhythm that was directly responsive to how funny the audience found each joke or physical gag, making The Honeymooners feel more like attending a live comedy performance than watching a pre-recorded television program. Fact 15. Jackie Gleason ended the show while it was still popular.
1053622.
What amount? 105.
That's no amount. That's my Social Security number. I thought maybe it was your weight.
In one of the most surprising decisions in television history, Jackie Gleason chose to voluntarily cancel The Honeymooners after just one season, even though the show had initially been the #2 most popular program on television and was still drawing millions of devoted viewers who eagerly tuned in every Saturday night. Gleason's decision to end the series came not because of poor ratings or network pressure, but because he genuinely believed that he and his writing staff had explored every possible storyline and situation that could realistically happen to Ralph and Alice Cramden within the constraints of their Brooklyn apartment setting. When Gleason signed his original contract with CBS and Buick, he had committed to producing 78 episodes over 2 seasons, with an option for a 3rd season of 39 more shows. But after completing the first 39 episodes, he became convinced that continuing the series would inevitably lead to repetitive plots and declining quality. He felt that the basic premise of a bus driver and his wife dealing with everyday working-class problems had been thoroughly examined, and that any additional episodes would simply be variations on themes they had already covered, which would disappoint both the audience and the creative team. Rather than risk tarnishing the show's reputation by producing inferior episodes just to fulfill his contractual obligations, Gleason made the bold choice to walk away from a financially lucrative and critically acclaimed series at the height of its success. His philosophy was that it was better to quit on a high note while the show was still beloved and respected than to continue producing episodes that might gradually erode the quality and legacy of what they had created. This decision ultimately proved to be wise, since the 39 episodes that were produced have maintained their popularity and cultural impact for decades without being diluted by weaker material.